Welcome back to the TrailBLAZER pod. Liora Rez shares her journey as a political refugee from the USSR to the United States. She discusses the rise of anti-Semitism in recent years and the role of social media in spreading hate. She stresses the importance of empowering communities and holding individuals accountable for promoting anti-Semitism. She shares how StopAntisemitism responds to increasing anti-Semitic violence across the United States. Let's dive in. Liora, welcome to the TrailBLAZER pod. How are you today?
I'm good. I'm so happy to be here with you.
Thank you so much. I want to give our listeners a little bit of context about you. I think you have such a unique story. So can you talk a little bit about your move here as a young child?
Yeah, absolutely. So my family and I are political refugees from the USSR. Ronald Reagan and then former Senator Baum really put an amazing push and effort into getting as much Soviet Jewry out of that region, the former USSR, as possible. And thankfully, we were amongst the first wave, or one of the first waves, in the mid-'80s. So I had come here as a little girl, and basically it was to flee the rabid anti-Semitism that my family, my parents, my grandparents, great-grandparents, and how many generations had to deal with in that area that they did. And thankfully, we were able to make the United States our new home.
Wow. I think that's really interesting because when I was growing up as a little girl, I learned about all that stuff in school, but I didn't really experience any of that in America, at least in my little community. And it was a very far-fetched idea for me. And unfortunately now we're feeling it very strongly wherever we live, right? So
Yeah,
that's actually a really
absolutely.
great context to...
Yeah, I have to tell you, I was also very, very fortunate. We had moved to Cleveland, Ohio, which has a very robust Jewish community, former Soviet Jewish community, Zionist community. It's always been, it's growing. So I was very fortunate to grow up in Northeast Ohio. My family and I had never experienced anti-Semitism that I know of. But you know, those dark memories always still took place because my parents were always afraid to hang mezuzahs on our front door. Yeah, that PTSD never goes away. But again, I had a very innocent childhood, very, happy teenage years, very oblivious to, I heard the stories, but I was, again, very naive to what could happen. Fast forward to, me being an adult and a mother and it coming full circle, specifically post 10/7. It's so scary and shocking.
Yeah, I actually, mentioning mother, I want to ask you, I read somewhere where you talked about this. How has motherhood changed your perspective and connection to Judaism?
It's 100% strengthened it. I grew up in a very Zionistic home, which makes sense. We had to flee our place of residence for generations due to anti-Semitism. We were given two options, the United States or Israel. My father decided to choose the United States. Even though, I always say, well, why didn't we go to Israel? Life would have been so different. But in regards to religious practices, there were none in our home. Again, not unusual for Soviet Jewry, as we were raised and lived under communism, where you were not allowed to practice. And if you did, you were subjected to the most horrific bouts of anti-Semitism and violence and just social shunning. So again, we grew up in a very non-religious home. I did attend Hebrew school, but beyond that, not much else. So when I became a mother, I'm not sure what triggered it, but we started lighting Shabbat candles every week, and alongside the holidays, celebrating Pesach and obviously, everything from Shavuot to Sukkot. And my grandparents grew up with us, specifically on my mother's side. My maternal grandmother is from Telsha, Lithuania, and this was the epicenter of Orthodox Jewry in Europe pre-Holocaust. And it's just so touching. I'm getting emotional just thinking about this. It's so touching that I could, rekindle that. And again, I'm not sure what triggered it, but it's just so important to me that future generations, my children, are brought up with these Judaic practices and traditions. So now, fast forward, my husband wraps tefillin every morning. We have Shabbat every evening. And again, I love that they're growing up with us.
That's amazing. I think that's so beautiful. I also think you not knowing is actually such a universal thing. I think everyone tries to pinpoint a reason for the things we do, and sometimes there's not a direct connection. So I
No.
love that. I love that honesty. Also, my mom, I'm the oldest in my family, and she was pregnant. She lived in Israel throughout her entire pregnancy, and she came back right before to have me. And I have the same question. I'm like, why couldn't you just let me be born in Israel?
Right.
So fast forward a little bit. You started the Jewish Chick account. First of all, I love the name, but what was that account and how did it start?
Yeah, absolutely. So I started Jewish Chick. Essentially, it became a brand. I started the social media account on Instagram in 2011, 2012, before anybody really even knew what Instagram was. So it was like kind of like the second wave of quote unquote influencers, as people are now called. And it was just a way, there was no intent or purpose to it. I had just started the account. You know, there was an episode that occurred at the United Nations where a meeting was taking place, and I had asked a rather bold question, and the speaker did not love it. And somebody had asked, you know, wow, who in the world does this woman think she is? Who is that? And I turned
Love
around and I
that.
said, just some Jewish chick away.
Oh, wow.
So that actually is inspiration to the account. I'm not sure I really talk about that, but it just came out of, you know, boldness and you know, out of the box thinking, I guess,
That's amazing.
which has served me very well in life and professionally and personally. But again, the Instagram account was started, and around 2014, during one of the conflicts, wars that Israel was involved in, the account just continued, you know, to grow into 2016, 17, and after obtaining branding deals and, you know, various collaborations, started getting a lot of pushback around 2016, 17, saying, you know, the account, you're too political, so on and so forth.
Really?
And I'm like, how in the world is that political if I'm not ever mentioning politics? And if I'm just self-identifying as literally a Jewish chick, why is my identity political in any way? And I could never get a straight answer. That was coinciding with the exact same time that the amount of anti-Semitism I was seeing, not just from society's, you know, typical norm of the neo-Nazi right, but radicals on the left. When I would take a peek at who these individuals are, you see they're proud communists, which again, my head is always exploding when I'm seeing this, considering it's what my family, you know, almost gave their lives to flee. You see it from the Nation of Islam followers. You saw it from the Black Hebrew Israelites. And again, in 2016, 17, when you said Black Hebrew Israelites, everyone, including Jews, were like, what in the world is that?
Right.
Including myself. So after a few meetings and conversations and gigs of fundraising, eventually this led me to starting Stop Antisemitism in 2018, because there was nothing out there addressing the amount of social media anti-Semitism, and there were no consequences in place for those that were spewing some of the most vile hatred. The stuff that we're seeing now, I was seeing back in 2015, 16, 17. Nobody was just paying attention. So that was the goal of Stop Antisemitism from day one. It still remains. We're now going into our 7th year, which is crazy. It's just exploded post 10/7.
Yeah. So before I ask you exactly what Stop Antisemitism is, I'm curious, was there like, I know you were saying this for a while, but was there one thing that kind of pushed you to actually start and say, okay, something's got to change?
Yeah, absolutely. This one I can pinpoint very directly.
Wow. Okay.
After meetings with several legacy orgs telling me that anti-Semitism on social media isn't a thing and social media isn't real. Again, fast forward to 2023, 24, just how wrong these legacy orgs were, and some still continue to be. It's mind-boggling how, to me, it was mind-boggling and baffling how even back then you can have your heads in the sand, but now going forward, still just the complete denial of what's happening on social media, and how really social media we can use to our benefit, as Stop Antisemitism does, in the fight against anti-Semitism. Never, when I want something, I never back down. I never take no for an answer, and hence Stop Antisemitism was born in 2018.
Amazing. So, what is Stop Antisemitism?
Yeah, so we're a grassroots watchdog organization that monitors hatred and bias against the Jewish people and nation. We've created essentially a digital army encompassing, I want to say we're like 600,000, 700,000 people. And that communications web spreads to 500 million eyes on our content every single month across all of our platforms. Wow. So yeah, the numbers are impressive, but what's even more impressive, and I always say we could never do this without our dedicated audience and allies and fighters. And again, this digital army, they partake in these calls to action, which include phone calls and emails. And this really is a massive, massive community effort, Jewish and non-Jewish, because I'm so proud to have non-Jewish allies join us in this fight that really utilize the power of social media in the fight against anti-Semitism. So we highlight anti-Semitism everywhere from the medical space to the political sphere, anything and everything in between. And we make sure that the playing field is leveled, that the same consequence instilled on members of other marginalized communities, the African American communities, members of the LGBTQ communities, Latino communities, the Jews are no better or no less than others. And those same consequences, we deserve that same protection. So what we're doing is essentially leveling the playing field in ensuring that racists and bigots, when you target Jews, you're met with the same consequences as other marginalized groups.
Yeah. I love the no better, no less.
Sometimes absolutely. We're all equal, and thank goodness in America, our laws ensure that.
Very powerful. How has it shifted, if at all, since October 7th?
Yeah, so our mission hasn't changed again since day one. Our goal is to create consequences for those that espouse hatred against the Jewish people and nation. What has happened since 10/7/2023 is essentially the Band-Aid has been ripped off, and the amount of anti-Semitism that we are seeing, I mean, we have approximately a 1,500 to 2,000% increase in incident reporting to us since then. It was, I cannot even describe, the team was pulling in 100-hour weeks, and it took us about 6 months to get through and get up to date on our backlog. It was horrifying to see the content that was being sent to us. And I finally understood how 40 years ago, why my parents literally gave up everything that they had and came to this country with nothing, with 2 young kids. So our mission has not changed. We've ramped up our efforts. Our team has essentially tripled in size, and we just continue to create consequences again for anti-Semites, bigots, racists. And I couldn't be more proud of our work. Since 10/7, our work has resulted in the firings, expulsions, suspensions of hundreds and hundreds of individuals, from dentists to doctors, to attorneys, to makeup artists, to hairdressers, to political figures, and we just continue to march forward.
I find it very interesting now that I'm talking to you and you were like explaining a little bit about yourself. You don't take no for an answer. You're bold. I think Stop Antisemitism is such a clear reflection now of you.
We are very, very bold.
Very bold.
And I will tell you something that not a lot of people know. Our entire team is female.
What?
And everyone thinks we're a group of men, even though I'm the face of the organization. After a simple Google search, you could literally see.
That's incredible.
Yeah, so everyone thinks we're men. Everyone always thinks that, I have a man to report to. And it's like, no, you reach the top. What can I do for you? But it's interesting to see that perspective, that they don't think women are capable of being bold and aggressive like this. And what can I say? My parents raised a female Maccabee, and it's just unfortunate that their daughter is doing this as a profession now.
Yeah, but we need people like you, and thanks for sharing that. I did not know that.
It's like a fun fact.
I love it. So you mentioned a little bit about social media, how people didn't think it had real consequences. Can you share a little bit more, because you're really dealing with this every day? How has social media played a role in ramping up anti-Semitism and then also in combating it?
Yeah, absolutely. Post 10/7, it's really shocking to see the individuals, specifically Again, not just the typical anti-Semite you would think of, right? The incel living in his mother's basement. Right away, Nick Fuentes pops into my head, who literally was just found out living in his mother's basement, who is head of the Groyper movement, and everything is the Jews' fault, and there's Holocaust denial, and yada yada yada.
Like stereotypical.
So it is. What's shocking to myself is the amount of anti-Semites we were seeing, specifically in academia and in the white collar sphere, medical professionals, bankers, lawyers, dentists. The most, I want to say, jarring are the OBGYNs who are delivering babies during the day and giving women annual pap exams. And then at night, they go home and they post on social media that rape is resistance.
Oh my God.
So again, it's nauseating. And these are the individuals that operate without consequence, without impunity. And, that's not acceptable. Yeah. You take a Hippocratic oath, testimony of ethics, a code of ethics, and we want to make sure that their employers are aware that their physicians, their medical professionals, their administrators are promoting rape, are promoting and denying the atrocities of 10/7, while during the day they are putting their hands on Jews.
It's not only horrifying, it's so hypocritical.
It's hypocritical, it's frightening. And I think since 10/7, we have had nearly it's 50 or 60 medical professionals that have lost their jobs due to their just insane anti-Semitism and promotion of terrorism, hatred of Jews. And they're still that we have that employers refuse to act. We had one, I believe he was a pediatric endocrinologist or pediatric nephrologist. He's operating at Bay State in Western Mass. He lives in Connecticut, and his employer refused to do anything and brushed it off as he's an older guy who doesn't know how to use social media. The issue is that you're employing a hateful anti-Semite who's married, by the way, to an anti-Semitic college professor instructor in Connecticut. And Bay State is refusing to do anything. So, their Jewish residents are filing complaints that they do not want to work under this man. Again, when you have, or in the future, if there's a medical lawsuit, employers have a duty to protect their Jewish employees. And when they throw their hands up in there and say, wow, what could have happened? Well, this is exactly the perfect situation. You had multiple chances to act and you refused. There's no protection in that case against Jewish employees, against Jewish patients. It's shocking.
Wow. Heartbreaking. The more we talk, we all know this now since October 7th especially, but it's just every story.
It's frightening. It's frightening, and we should never stand for it.
Yeah. So I want to talk to you a little bit about anti-Semitism because I think you're the perfect person to ask these questions. So Jews make up just over 2% of the American population, right? However, we're subject to more than 60% of religious-based hate crimes. Why is this?
So that's a very complicated question, and you ask this and get so many different answers from others. Anti-Semitism is one of the oldest cancers in human history. During COVID, for instance, Jews were blamed for COVID, for spreading COVID, for starting the COVID vaccine. Everything was our fault, right? Jews are communists, but no, we're not. We're capitalists and excessive in our consumption. We run Hollywood, which, by the way, if we do a really bad job of portraying our own selves. We run the banks, but no, we don't, because when we actually look at the top CEOs, not a lot are Jewish. We run the government, except no, we don't. There's never been a Jewish vice president or president. So again, whatever is going on in society, whether it's political, economical, pandemic, it is always somehow our fault. And whether in history we just didn't fight back as hard as others, I don't know. Whether it was a unity issue, I don't know. But it's a great question that, again, you can get a lot of different answers. It could be jealousy, that when something happens to Jews, we not only survive, we thrive. If you look at history, the pogroms from Middle East, North Africa, the mass expulsion of nearly 1 million Mizrahi Sephardic Jews. You look at what happened in Spain, the mass conversions, you look at the Holocaust, obviously. No matter what happens to us, again, we not only survive, we thrive. Perhaps people are not too happy about that. So I can't give you a straight answer.
That's okay.
But whatever we're doing now with the education and so on and so forth, nothing worked. Nothing. The billions poured into Holocaust education, anti-Semitism, awareness. In 2023, 2024, when that Band-Aid was ripped off, we just saw the massive failure of the billions of dollars poured into the advocacy and educational space, and it's not working. I will tell you what is working is when you create consequences against this hatred, and you tell people that when you spew hate against Jews, just like you do any other marginalized minority, that there will be consequences, including job loss, community shaming, loss of friendships, so on and so forth.
Yeah. I think the statistic is just so staggering, and I just wanted to hear your take on it. So thank you.
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and I guess just long story short, there's not one answer. Yeah. Whether, again, it's lack of education, it's the social media, the ease of spreading the hate, not enough oversight of the social media heads. More governmental oversight perhaps is needed, removing immunity from the social media platforms, making them more responsible. There's a lot of solutions. There's a lot to unpack there.
Yeah. So when I was growing up, common thing that I heard and was taught is anti-Semitic rhetoric, Jews have horns. That was a really common one for me, and very visual, of course, for kids also. Sure. But what are some of the less known tropes of anti-Semitic rhetoric?
So I have to tell you right now, with the power of social media, I mean, my parents growing up always heard the word, I don't want to say it, K-I-K-E.
Yeah.
And now that essentially disappeared. And now with the rise of with the power of social media and the spread of social media, that word has resurged. And my mother specifically said, this is what I was called as a little girl. I can't believe now as a grandmother, this is like being spray painted on college campuses. So you have the resurgence of pre-Holocaust, post-Holocaust hatred that, thanks to social media, a lot of this anti-Semitic jargon is coming into play. One thing that is very, very ironic is this horseshoe theory that you see the leftist anti-Semite constantly substituting the word Zionist for Jew, and then you see the Nick Fuenteses on the right in that circle, and Dan Bilzerian and Jake Shields and Candace Owens. You have them now adopting the Zionist conspiracies and Zionist powers. Again, that horseshoe theory that the left and right, the extreme left and right, they loathe each other, but they have the common hatred of Jews in common, except now they use Zionists, colonizers, occupiers, things like that. So I think that's what we're really seeing a massive rise of, is this horseshoe theory of hatred.
Yeah. So speaking of Zionism, is there any difference between anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism, anti-Israel rhetoric?
So listen, I always say, if you want to criticize Israel, go get a bunch of Jews in a room. I mean, that's all we do, right? Left, right, middle, up, down, all around. You can criticize Israel all you want that is not anti-Semitic. However, holding Israel to a double standard that you do not hold any other country to is problematic. When you are so obsessed with, quote unquote, what's Israel's crimes against humanity, which again is a complete falsity, while ignoring what's happening in Moscow with the Ukraine war, when you're ignoring Iran, when you're ignoring one of the most brutal actual genocides in Sudan, and that's just, a tiny list, and you're just so hyper-focused on what's happening in Israel, and when you are denying the one Jewish nation in the world to exist, but you're okay with dozens of Christian majority nations, over 50 Muslim majority nations, but you again have an issue with that one tiny little sliver of Jewish land, that's anti-Semitic.
Yeah, really well said. A term that came up for me when I was doing my handy dandy research is model minority. So can you explain a little bit what that is and how it relates to the Jewish
Yeah,
community?
so model minority, actually, I spoke about it a few minutes ago. It's really geared towards marginalized communities, that Jews are a minority, right? However, no matter what happens to us, we not only survive, we thrive. It's also used against the Asian communities often. It's sometimes used against Indian communities that when they immigrate to the United States for whatever political refugee status, the focus of obtaining that American dream and working hard to that American dream, despite being a minority in the United States. And again, Jews are very different when compared with Asians and those from India, for example. When you look at the population of India, right, we exceed 1 billion. When you look at the population of China and other countries, they're in the billions. So when you look at Jews globally, we're tiny. There's what, 16 million of us globally, and about, let's say, a little bit less than half or a third of that is in the United States. So again, we're not only a global minority, but we are a minority in the United States. When we speak of a model class minority, this is what we generally refer to, or I generally refer to, is specifically in the United States. That what happens with the Asian community, the Jewish community, if something bad happens, it's okay. They'll not only survive and thrive. And that mentality really leads to discrimination. We saw it at Harvard, where they were denying both Asian and Jewish students admissions, and there was a massive, I believe it was a Title VI legal complaint, or it might have actually went into a civil complaint, a civil legal lawsuit. But essentially, a model minority, even though, yes, they're marginalized, what happens to them is not as bad, because again, they'll not only survive, they'll thrive. Wow. And that couldn't be the furthest thing from the truth, because again, Jews, African Americans, Muslims, we are no better, no less than anyone else, and everyone deserves and is entitled to equal protection under the law.
Yeah, I love that. What is your name and shame strategy? Where did it come from?
So we create consequences, and we want to ensure that, again, that playing field is leveled, that when you spew hatred against Jews, that's not okay, and there are going to be consequences for your actions. And again, it was just the goal of Stop Antisemitism and in our mission since day one. What is the best avenue to do that? It's clearly social media. There's no more traditional advertising. Everyone is on social media, whether you're 9 or 90. It's just everywhere, whether it's in the gaming world, whether it's on TikTok, whether it's on Facebook, Instagram, X, you name it. Everyone is on some type of platform. And what Stop Antisemitism does and has done since day one, we've just used the power of social media, and essentially we're boomeranging that hatred back at the perpetrator of that racism.
I love that. So I know like a lot of people on social media were like doxing Jewish people, right, as anti-Semitic tactics.
People throw out the term doxing very casually. And doxing in various states is actually illegal. Doxing involves the distribution of personal identifiable information, or PII, whether it's a home address, a date of birth, a home phone number, mobile phone number, that will essentially enable somebody to find another individual very, very easily, for instance, in their home. We, Stop Antisemitism, does not dox. Do not endorse that. We do not endorse violence against any individual. The information that we publish is searchable. Anyone can find it in a 0.25 second LinkedIn profile that are public. Contrary to what a lot of our folks think, the social media platforms are not providing us any quote unquote insider information. Al Jazeera just went on an insane tangent about supposedly our relationship with several Meta executives. No one is feeding us any secret information that is clearly against the law. The things that we publish are searchable, open to the public. Do we ever feature home addresses, date of births? No, never. We do not endorse those types of tactics.
Yeah. Liora, what's your vision for Stop Antisemitism moving forward? You've ramped up since October 7th. The mission has always stayed the same, but do you see it growing, changing, evolving?
Yeah, unfortunately, my husband says we're like dentists. We're never going to run out of work.
Oh my God.
I don't know if you can compare cavities and root canals to anti-Semites, but they're both unpleasant, right?
Yeah.
So the team continues to grow. We thankfully we're privately funded. Our donors are amazing partners, and yeah, we don't plan on going anywhere. We're ramping up our mission. We started actually a new initiative. It's almost a year old on Black Friday of 2023, where we launched stopdon'tshop.org. It identifies small businesses with CEOs, presidents that are anti-Semitic in nature. So we want to make sure that the consumer is aware where to spend your money wisely. So we continue to ramp up that initiative, and we're just going to keep trucking ahead in the new year. We're sure there's no shortage of content and individuals that are coming our way.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you're not going anywhere, because I think
we're definitely not going anywhere.
We need you. I end off this podcast asking everyone this question. Liora, what does being a trailblazer mean to you?
A trailblazer never takes no for an answer when you truly want something. And again, I am so blessed to have parents that raised a woman like that.
I love that. You're so inspiring, because a lot of us see a problem and we don't think of being the person to create the solution.
Whether it's just participating in a campaign, whether it's sharing something with our communities, our parents, our friends, 10/7 has really shown us that not any of us, not one Jew can afford to be silent anymore. And it's so amazing to see how many groups have started, coalitions, collaborations have resulted in this. Individuals are saying, that I wasn't close to my Judaism, or I don't really, I consider myself this, and then a Jew, where being Jewish has now popped up to the top of that list. So unfortunately, it took such a massive tragedy like this for various things to occur. But I think how unified we are, how closer we are to our Judaism, how more and more individuals have really started wearing Stars of David, how many men have started rapping in the morning, how many, teens are, putting their Judaism first. I think it's amazing. But unfortunately, it took a massacre of 10/7 to bring us to that point. But every single one of us has a talent that we can use to make some type of change or be a domino in that chain of change.
Yeah. I think that's why it's important to hear from women like you, to know that we could do it. I think a lot of us have all these ideas and we want to be a part. We just don't know how to take the first step. And sometimes it's just taking the first step.
I always tell my team, every one of us has amazing ideas. I want to make sure we all hear about it, because I don't have all the answers. Nobody does. However, somebody out there does. So if you have an idea, go talk about it with your girlfriends, talk about it with your sisters, your mothers, your fathers, your friends, your communities, your rabbis, anyone, because that one little tidbit of advice could be that little opening or piece of the puzzle that you need to foment and put into action the idea that you have.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Liora.
No, thanks so much for having me. It was a pleasure.